So my name is Nuh. Okay, slides are gone. I am originally from Turkey or Turkey, and I'm very happy to be here, very happy and honored to be here, and I hope you'll find my talk interesting and informative. And this is my first time in Memphis, alhamdulillah, and it's really great to be here and to be speaking in this conference. I thank all of the organizers and all the speakers, especially those who spoke before me, who gave me, a few more minutes because I need them. 30 minutes is not enough for me. Hopefully it will be informative and interesting for you because I have a big agenda, as you can see. So this talk is partially my own personal story, but it is much more than that. It is connected to and reflection of a much larger global story. And okay, so these slides, can they be stable? So yeah, I need the slides. So, and I made a little video about myself and my story, how and why I became interested in this field, because I'm a mathematician, I'm a math professor. I had no training in this field, and and I was not planning to do any work in this field at all. It all started with me teaching this course, History of Math in the Islamic World, but I was not planning to teach such a course. The idea came from a colleague in my college from another department, not myself. I said, oh, that's a great idea, but I hardly knew anything about it. I started learning everything from scratch to be able to teach this course. I started teaching this course more than 10 years ago now, and here is the website of the course. And what I learned was really fascinating and disturbing at the same time. It compelled me to do something about this field, right? I just couldn't, help it. So this is how my story started. And I learned a lot of lessons, and I would like to share some of these lessons I learned with you. And one lesson I learned was from the history, right? I realized that there's a huge legacy of Islamic civilization, intellectual legacy, contributions to math and sciences, but unfortunately it is mostly hidden, right? It is mostly hidden and forgotten or lost. Instead, a Eurocentric, distorted narrative of history of math and science has been taught everywhere, not only in the West, but in the Muslim world as well. And we Muslims largely forgotten this legacy. And we don't know much about it, generally speaking. And I also realized that there is a huge disconnect between the teachings of the Quran and the state of affairs in the Muslim world, the practice, the real life of Muslims. I mean, that was also very disturbing and eye-opening. And I think we need to take lessons from both history and the message of the Quran to improve and to change ourselves and our state of affairs. So, again, I have a really ambitious agenda, and I have a lot of things, big ideas and specific examples, and so, it will be fast. I have many slides, but I have many links to resources, and I'm happy to share my slides with anyone interested. And this is basically my opinions and findings based on my academic research, personal reflections, and life experiences to this date. Okay, again, it will be fast. Okay, we are about to take off, okay? Are you ready? So hopefully we'll finish by in about 40 minutes. So there are three parts to my talk. So to me, Beit al-Hikmah is the symbol of the golden age of Islamic civilization in math and sciences, and there is so much to learn from that history, both from the rise and the fall, right? Not only rise, glorious time, but also, the decline. And the second part, what is the message of Quran, how it relates to doing science and scientific research, and then what can we do looking ahead? Okay, so why should we care about history, right? So for some, it is a source of feeling good and nostalgic and heroic about our past, right? And Should that be the main reason of doing history? To me, no, right? That should not be the reason to learn about history. Then what should be the real reason to learn about history? Well, the Quran tells us why. Remember, a significant part of the Quran is about histories of past nations, isn't it? Some of them repeated many, many times. And what is the purpose? Is it to give us knowledge about history or something else? After many of these stories, we see this verse, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ. What does it mean? There are lessons to be learned from these stories for future and to improve ourselves, right? So this should be our guide about history, right? And there are many lessons and questions to ask, such as, the Muslim world became the center of research and scholarship in a very short amount of time. That was really remarkable. And that was unexpected. And it was one of the major events in world history, really, right? And we need to ask, what were the reasons behind it? It's such a remarkable progress in such a short time. That was amazing, that was unexpected, that was extraordinary. And we need to ask, how did that happen, right? But similarly, later on, we lost it, right? Again, there are lessons to learn from that. What were the reasons behind it, right? And we should really investigate these questions deeply, right? We should be skeptical and cautious about accepting simplistic answers. We really need to think about these questions deeply and investigate, right? And there is much to learn from it, and we need to go deep. Superficial, quick, simplistic answers are not good enough. We need to go deep, right? And we need to seek these questions as a community, right? These are really important, critical questions for us. Okay, so let's start with the history part. So in my journey, when I started learning about it, one of the very first things I quickly learned was the research in this field is highly incomplete. So this is the main textbook for my course. Look at the title. It is episodes as opposed to the history of mathematics in the Islamic world, because the author says such a book cannot be written yet because there is so much materials still waiting to be studied, right? We only know parts and pieces as opposed to the full picture. So much material remains unstudied, right? Again, another expert in this field, Victor Katz, says the same thing, right? A complete history cannot be written yet because there are so much materials waiting to be studied. Okay, David King, another expert in Islamic astronomy, who wrote 2 huge volumes about this, and he says, this material has never been researched before in modern times. And look at this. It is Western researchers studying Islamic math and science. You see, this is one of the unfortunate things. Most of the experts about Islamic math and science are Western researchers, and they are saying this. Nobody has researched these materials before. Edward Kennedy, one of the best experts, again, yet another Western expert in this field, he describes the situation as embarrassment of the riches, right? We keep finding more materials, more materials about math and science from the Islamic civilization. So even this book, published almost a century ago, right? And the authors of this book, they actually have strong prejudice against Islamic civilization and Islam. Even they acknowledge this fact, right? The new materials that we keep finding, changing our view of contributions and nature of and contributions of Islamic math and science, right? So it is clear that a chapter in the global history of science needs more work. It needs more work on 2 fronts. One is academic research on primary source materials. But the second, which is equally important, is dissemination of this information to the general public. Just because you establish something as an academic fact, based on research, does not guarantee that it is going to become common knowledge. We need to also work on that to make it common knowledge, right? Just a few experts specialized in this field knowing is not good enough. right? We need to make it common knowledge, disseminate it to general public. And the key factor in that is to include this material in school curriculum, right? Most people don't know about Islamic contributions to math and sciences because it is generally not part of the school curriculum, right? We need to work on that as well. I hope this conference and this organization will make an effort in that direction as well, right? And I would like to give some examples that are really striking to me to illustrate in a concrete way what I'm talking about, right? So my first example about the history of decimal fractions. So here is a book about Simon Stevan, a European scholar of 16th to 17th century, published in 2008 by two European professors, right? Simon Stevan. And there is a foreword to this book by a very highly educated person, namely a Nobel laureate in physics, right? Gerard Hooft, Nobel Prize winner for physics 1999, and he claims that Simon Stevan was the inventor of the decimal number system. Well, he simply, this is false information. This is like clearly, blatantly false information. But he is simply repeating this false information from within the book, right? So the author claims that he's the author of the first textbook about decimal fractions. This is clearly false information. But how is it that such experts, such highly educated people making such blatant statements? Is this a simple overlook? Is that an isolated incident, or is there more to it? Well, as you can anticipate, there is more to it. There is a bigger background to it. So here is another paper on the same subject from 1935 by George Sarton. George Sarton is not an ordinary researcher. He was a Harvard professor, and he is considered the founder of modern discipline of history of science, right? So he's such a foundational figure for the subject, and he wrote about it in 1935, and this paper is full of inaccurate statements, right? He claims that the occurrence of decimal fractions can be exactly dated as 1585 because of Stevan's work, right, book. And it is full of the fact that even the best mathematicians of Middle Ages did not think of decimal fractions, shows that they did not grasp the concept, he claims, right, in 1935. But just about a decade later, researchers discovered this book. Not that it was lost, it was not researched before. This book is Miftah al-Hisab by al-Kashi, right? Written in 1427, more than 150 years before Simon Stevan. And this book contains a systemic treatment and development of decimal fractions, more than 150 years before Stevan. And therefore, researchers assumed, oh, it must be al-Kashi who discovered decimal fractions. But then in 1960s, they found yet another manuscript written by al-Uqludisi, Abul Hasan Ibrahim bin al-Uqludisi, and this book was written in the middle of 10th century, more than 6 centuries before Simon Stevan, and almost 5 centuries before al-Kashi, and the Kitab al-Fusul fil Hisab al-Hindi. And this book, as far as we know, as far as available evidence shows, is the first book in history that introduces the decimal point and decimal fractions, right? And so now, this is 1960s, right? About 30 years after Sarton's paper, and there is a unique copy of this manuscript. So whereas there are so many manuscript copies of Miftah available in many places, including all over Europe, but really curious, there is a single manuscript copy of this book is known, and guess where it is? It is in a library in Istanbul, Turkey, which happens to be my hometown. But we did not care to study this. We did not care. It was not a Turkish scholar who studied this book. It was someone else in 1960s. But look, by this time, the false information is established as the standard knowledge. Now, good luck changing it. You see, good luck changing it. So see, this book is available in English translation fully. You can buy it, you can get it. But these very highly educated people still, and this was published in 1978. This book was translated to English and fully available 1978. You know, the book about Simon Stevin, 2008, they still don't know about this, right? They still don't know about it. And it is not only their fault, it is also our fault. This book has been sitting in Istanbul. We did not care to study it, right? So here is the first decimal point in history. It is a little vertical dash. It is not a point, right? So here is the first decimal point in history, as far as available evidence and documents show. And there is a little video about it. So even though Simon Stevin introduced the concept more than 6 centuries after Al-Uqludisi, his notation was weird. So to represent this number, Al-Uqludisi would simply put a little vertical dash on top of 4, but Stevin putting all of these extra numbers and putting them in circles. This is really weird, unnecessary, strange notation. Yet, the authors of this book makes this statement. They say, it is not his invention, and his notation is not elegant. I mean, this is astonishing. Yet, worse yet, they claim to discuss earlier history of decimal point and decimal fractions, but they leave out the most important figures in their discussion. They don't talk about Al-Kashi and Miftah, and they don't talk about Al-Uqludisi in their discussion of earlier history. This is just astonishing, right? Like the experts are doing this. I mean, this is astonishing. So, again, they make all of these statements as if they are discussing the earlier history of the subject. So when you look at the big picture, what is called Arabic numerals these days, they evolved over time. It originated in India, and it came to the Muslim world. By the way, Muslim scholars never called them Arabic numerals, right? What did they call them? Indian numerals, as you saw in the title of the book, right? They knew their source. However, the number system, decimal number system they learned from India was only for whole numbers. It did not include decimal fractions. So with the work of Al-Uqludisi and Al-Kashi, it became complete. Therefore, it would be more accurate to call this number system, modern number system, Indian Arabic number system, as opposed to Arabic numerals, right? Arabic number system. So, you see, this single example alone contains many lessons, really many lessons. We see that there were misconceptions and misattributions due to lack of research and ideological presumptions and prejudice. And even after accurate information is discovered, it doesn't guarantee that it is going to be common knowledge. We need to work to make that happen, right? And we also see interconnectedness of civilizations, and we see that scientific progress is often the joint contribution of multiple civilizations, right? So this number system today is definitely not European. It is not purely Arabic. It is not purely Indian either. You see, it is a joint contribution. We need to acknowledge that. And then there is a lot of false information. I'm sure many of you heard that Muslims invented zero. How many people heard that? Muslims invented zero. This is false information, undisputably false. There is, you see, look, the number system they learned from India, it already contained a symbol for zero, right? There was already zero there. However, that zero was not regarded as a number by itself. It was only a symbol to designate the fact that a position is empty. Regarding zero as a number by itself was a more abstract idea that came later. Muslim scholars did not do either of this. So this is, see, Muslims invented zero, very popular false information, but nobody knows the correct information that it was a Muslim scholar who introduced the decimal fraction, point and decimal fraction. Why is that? Why is it that false information is more popular? Because fake news travels fast, or, You see, this is just one example. There are many more examples like this. So here's, we made videos about these subjects. And so here's our video about the decimal point and decimal fractions based on, again, primary source materials. Okay, my second example, Who is this guy? Do you know? Anyone? Copernicus, right? I mean, everyone knows about Copernicus, but very few people know about his connections with earlier Islamic scholars. And we probably learn more about this in the talk right after the break, even though it has been many decades since these connections were discovered. So here is a paper from 1957. 1957, how many years is that, right? More than 60 years. And look at the title of this paper, A Pre-Copernican Model, right? Again, the author is Victor Roberts, who was a student of Edward Kennedy, who was one of the prominent figures in the discipline. They discovered, again, these are Western researchers. You see, Western researchers studying Islamic Arabic manuscripts, they discovered that, some of Copernicus' astronomical models were not just similar, but identical. They were identical to astronomical models of an earlier scholar by the name of Ibn Shatter, who came 2 centuries before Copernicus, right? 1957. And it was not all. In 1970s, they discovered even more things, right? Willy Hartner discovered that there is a theorem, mathematical theorem, known as 2C couple in the literature, that was originally discovered by Nasreddin Tusi in 13th century. It appears in the Copernicus work, identical. The statement and the proof is identical down to the point of labeling important points in the geometric figure, where Tusi used Arabic elif, you see. Copernicus used the corresponding Latin letter A. Here is the Arabic B, Dal, and D. So there was a one-to-one correspondence even in the labeling of the points in the geometric figure. And Hartner came to the conclusion that this cannot be a coincidence, right? This just cannot be a coincidence. So this was a shocking discovery. That prompted some researchers to look into the work of Copernicus and earlier Islamic scholars. And after closely examining those works on primary source materials, they came to this conclusion. In a very real sense, Copernicus can be seen as a continuation of research in astronomy in the Islamic world. So look, these are researchers based on primary, but this is not what people learn in school, is it? People learn in school that, Copernicus started a sudden revolution, yes? But that is not the truth, right? That is not the real picture. So we also made a video about this. Okay, again, I could spend more time on all of these, but the time is limited here. One more example, Ibn al-Haytham. I'm sure most of you heard of Ibn al-Haytham, right? Ibn al-Haytham, one of the giants of Islamic science. And his place in the global history of science must be at the very top, right? The first class scholar and scientist. He is known as the father of optics because he was the first person in history who correctly understood how vision occurs and how we see things. However, his more important contribution to science was the methodology he used. He insisted on using simple, repeatable experiments to verify or disprove your hypotheses, right? So in that sense, he was the pioneer of experimental method, right? Including experimentation in scientific inquiry. However, as usual, the credit for that goes to European scholars who came centuries later, right? Like Francis Bacon, Galileo, or Newton. We also made videos about the works of Ibn al-Haytham about scientific method, optics, and also calculus. We also did some calculus. Okay, so my field of mathematics is full of misattributions and false attributions, misleadingly named things, such as, I'm sure you have heard of Pascal's triangle, right? It is totally misleading to call it Pascal's triangle, Fibonacci numbers, Hamiltonian, full of misattributions. But the thing is, these misattributions alone is not the bigger problem. The bigger problem is this big picture, right? Distorted picture, that everyone learns. So that is a major problem, which is, this certain, narrative of history of science, which is written with certain ideology that regards ancient Greeks as the source of all brilliant science, right? Everyone else, was like second-class people or intellectuals. So they are like the ultimate source of brilliant scientific research. So until I read George Saliba's book, some of you may know George Saliba. I don't know if, he's one of the experts in the history of Islamic astronomy. Until I read this book, I did not know anything about it. But as soon as I read it, it resonated very strongly with me because I said, oh, this is real. This is true. This is real. I have seen it in so many ways, in so many places. So here is George Saliba. I have seen it everywhere. I have seen it everywhere, right? So, and it turns out that this narrative of science, history of science, is rooted in colonial times and colonial mindset. And this is best explained by an expert, Simon Scheffer, professor of history and philosophy of science at the University of Cambridge. Notice that he's speaking from the center of greatest colonial power in history, right? Just from the center. He explains that to justify their colonial enterprise, Europeans imagined and assumed that they are intellectually superior to everyone else because of their science and technology. You see, they viewed the world this way, they wrote the history with this assumption, they shaped the education system with this assumption, right? And again, you can see his explanation in this BBC documentary about Islam and science. And we can see manifestation of this sentiment in many books. Look at this. Look, I mentioned this book before. Muslim scholars are thinkers on a restricted sense. You see, restricted sense. They are like second-class intellectuals. There is no way that they can be as good as ancient Greeks. We should not expect to find anything as original, as brilliant as Greeks. That's their assumption. Even when they look at Islamic works in math and science, they are looking those works with these prejudice and presumptions, right? And here is a typical book on history of math, published in 21st century. He's talking about algebra and al-Khwarizmi, but his assumption is simple of algebra of al-Khwarizmi cannot be as sophisticated as his predecessors. Right? This is his assumption. With this mindset, you are going to miss all of the original things in his work. And he did, right? So, according to this common narrative, classical narrative, so when they look at Muslim world, they look at it in religious terms and it's all about politics and religion, you see. They ignore or belittle intellectual and scientific progress. They still acknowledge a golden age, right? However, according to this point of view, this golden age was all about preserving brilliant Greek science through translations. In other words, Muslim civilization served as a refrigerator to preserve ancient Greek science, to make it available to Renaissance, right? So, and according to this narrative, it was a short period of time that came to an end with Al-Ghazali's criticism of philosophers. If not that, then Mongol invasion of Baghdad in the next century, and therefore, there is no need to look at scientific works in Muslim world after these events. Now, I will have a few words about this book. Some of you may have heard of this book, The 100. A lot of Muslims are impressed by this book because of the number one person in the list. However, when you actually read this book, you'll see that it is such a clear manifestation of this classical narrative mindset. Okay, so if we come back to the first example, you see there is such a big history, big background behind the fact that these very educated people are making such blatantly false statements. It is not by accident, you see. There is all of this history behind it. Okay, who is number 2 in this book? Newton, Isaac Newton, right? There are many Renaissance scholars in this book. And for each person, he explains why he gave the ranking to this person. So for Newton, one of the reasons is that his achievements in optics alone, right? His achievements in optics alone would probably entitle him to a place on this list. And he doesn't say anything about the father of optics, you see. Father of optics who came many centuries before Newton. You know, why is that? Because most people simply don't know about it. Okay. Oh, did it stop working? Okay. This is on. Okay, I really need this to work because I have so many slides. Okay, so number 12, Galileo, it was he who first insisted upon necessity of performing experiments. Really? Ibn Haytham did it so many centuries before Galileo, right? But nobody knows about it, right? Credit always goes to Copernicus, starting point of modern science, right? Everybody learns that Copernicus started a sudden revolution. However, those who actually studied the primary source materials, they see Copernicus as a continuation, you see. So you get a different picture if you actually look at all of the evidence. So the actual evidence gives us a different story, right, and different picture. This golden age was a longer period of time. Yes, Muslim scholars translated all of the Greek works, but they went way beyond it. They critiqued, improved upon, corrected, created new disciplines, and they also started a program of fixing the problems. They made a lot of original contributions that were then used by Renaissance scholars much later. Okay, so was it really about preserving Greek science, right? The golden age? Well, again, it is the same Ibn al-Haytham who wrote this book, Esh-Shukuk ala Batlamyus. Why did he write such a book? Right? Why? Because he read everything with a very critical mind. He says, if your goal is to find the truth, you must submit to the argument and demonstration, evidence and demonstration, not just blindly accepting sayings of other people, no matter how famous they might be, you see. This is his approach, very critical mind. This is not simply imitating. It is not just blindly imitating things. And see, Muslim scholars found a lot of problems in Greek astronomy, and they started a research program to fix all of these problems. And Ibn al-Haytham was also one of the pioneers of this approach. And through their research over many centuries, they discovered new things. They made improvements, which were then used by Copernicus. Again, there is such a background before his work. Again, this is what you conclude based on primary source materials. So astronomy was one of the most important disciplines in the golden age of Islamic science, and we'll learn more about that after the break. So one indication of that fact is observatory is a scientific institution that we know today was born and developed in the Muslim world. It is one of the legacies. Another indication, there are so many star names that come from Arabic, either Arabic or come from Arabic, right? So we also made a video about Islamic contributions to astronomy and more videos about other topics in math and mathematical sciences. Even though this legacy is largely forgotten, we have reminders of it. We have reminders such as so many technical and scientific words in English coming from Arabic, right? Everything from algebra to zero. And again, many star names, Arabic, or come from Arabic, that did not happen by accident, you see. It did not happen by accident. And Muslim scholars contributed to all of the disciplines of their time, in some cases creating new disciplines. Okay, all right. Second part, the message of the Quran and scientific. Again, all of these deserve more time and space than I have right now. So one of the misconceptions of this common narrative is that the idea that there is always conflict between religion and science, right? Is that the case, at least for the Islamic civilization? Well, David King, again, one of the Western experts on this field, says, no, this is not the case in the case of Islamic civilization. In fact, the opposite is true, right? Religion was one of the major factors behind all of this progress in the Muslim world. And to me, again, if you think about what were the reasons behind such a remarkable progress in sciences in such a short period of time? To me, there were a few reasons. The most important, the most fundamental, is the fact that the emphasis of the Quran on learning, reasoning, questioning, and the value of knowledge, right? And also the study of nature as a creation of Allah and His science. I think these are the most fundamental reasons. But this is at the theological and philosophical level. And there were also more practical reasons, such as, practicing certain duties in Islam, you needed some mathematical calculations, such as determining prayer times and determining qibla and calculation of zakat. Especially, qibla direction, it was a brand new problem religion gave Islamic scholars to solve, and it required really sophisticated mathematics, and Muslim scholars invented new mathematics to solve it, and they did, right? And directly from religion, practice of religion. You also need some social, economic, and political conditions in the society to help flourish scientific progress. Again, all of these are really big topics. I will just highlight a few things in the rest of my time. See, when you think about relationship between religion and science, and in particular Islam and science, first we should think about when we are engaged in scientific activity, there are actually some assumptions about the universe that we are making, right? Such as natural world is comprehensible to human mind, right? And human mind is capable of understanding it. Natural laws are universal. Doing science is valuable. Observation is important, and so forth, right? There are assumptions like that. So what is the relationship between these assumptions, preconditions, doing science, and Quranic teachings? Does Quranic teaching support these conditions? Again, we already heard these verses at the beginning. I loved it. It was a great coincidence. Remember, when angels ask Allah, why are you creating this violent human being? He taught Adam the names of all things, right? That means this creature is able to learn, right? It's a learning creature, and it seems like the fact that human beings is able to learn is like a justification, the reason why he's created, right? Okay, so knowledge is so important. And in fact, we can see this in the Quran. Of course, we all know about this as well. The knowledge is very important, right? So Quran makes the point that knowledge is very important, and it is deep knowledge, you see? Not the shallow knowledge, but the deep knowledge. Knowledge is important and valuable. Again, there are so many verses about it. And to learn, we must use our intellect, yes? We must reason. And so there are 49 times in the Quran verses containing, akal, from akal, and it is always a verb. It is never used as a noun, which means we must use it. So Allah gave us the intellect, and we are expected to use it, right? What if we don't? What if we don't? Quran has very strong words against people who do not use their reason, you see? Those who do not use their mind, they are the worst of all creatures, right? And those, in other words, those who do not reason, Allah casts on them the filth and the dirt. These are really strong words for people who do not want to use their intellect, right? And so many verses, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَمْ تَكُونُوا تَعْقِلُونَ. Importance of using our intellect is really emphasized in the Quran. I don't think there is another, text of major religion that has such an emphasis on using our mind and intellectual capabilities. And what is it that we are supposed to learn, right? We must learn using our intellect, but what are the most important things we must learn? Well, it is ayatullah that we must learn, right? Because this is one of the most important concepts in the Quran, ayah or ayat. And Quran tells us that the universe is full of, there are ayat we must learn, and the meaning of ayah is like, there's many meanings, but the main, it can mean sign, proof, evidence, marvel, lessons, miracle, right? That is something so significant that it deserves our attention, right? Ayah. That is one of the most important concepts in the Quran. And what are these ayats and where are they? Well, it is mentioned 382 times in the Quran. And where are they? Of course, the verses of the Quran are among ayatullah, but there are more, right? Ayat in the universe. There are many verses that start with وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. There are ayat in the universe, and we are supposed to care about them and learn about them. And there are ayat in our own selves, in our psychology, in creation. And there are also ayat in the stories of old nations, right? There are ayat in all of these places, and we are supposed to care about them, learn about them, study them, right? With this point of view, the conflict between religion and science is totally nonsense, right? It is just the total opposite for us, right? It is total opposite. Doing science is nothing other than studying ayatullah. So with this point of view, with the message of Quran, doing science is actually an ibadah, right? And there cannot be a conflict because he is the author of the book of universe and the book of Quran. There cannot be any conflict. And we are expected to study ayatullah, right? What if we don't? What if we don't study ayatullah? Well, denying them is kufr, greatest sin, right? It's the greatest sin. It's the greatest sin. But what if we just ignore them? We don't deny them, but we ignore them. I think this is unfortunately our current of state. What about just ignoring them? Look at this verse from Surah Yusuf, I believe, right? So how many signs in the heavens and the earth do they pass by ignoring them? This is not good. As Muslims, we should not ignore ayatullah, right? So important, when we try to learn something, questioning is also, using your mind means questioning. And I'm sure most people know about Jeffrey Lang and his book, Even Angels Ask, right? This is again referring to the same verse. This is the title of his book. Even angels are asking. Asking questions is not a bad thing. You see, Quran gives us examples of angels asking. Prophets also asking, right? Prophet Ibrahim alayhis salam is also asking. Is the natural thing to do when you try to use your reason, right? And our knowledge must be based on evidence, sound evidence. How many times Quran says, "Hatu burhanakum," bring your evidence, right? If you claim something, you must back it up with evidence. This is exactly how you do science. And listening to diversity of opinions is not a bad thing, right? Quran says, the people of understanding, they listen to different opinions, and at the end they choose the best, right? This is how we learn. We should not be afraid of listening to other. So there is such a great emphasis in the Quran about, learning and teaching and questioning and, observing, proving, justifying, asking and inquiring, reflecting and pondering, looking, seeing, it's amazing. A religious text putting such an emphasis on intellectual activities, it is amazing, right? You don't see it, you don't find it in any other religious book. Again, there are so many verses in the Quran that urge us to study ayatullah fi samawati wal ard, right? So this is from Surah Ali Imran, right? In the creation of the heavens and the earth, in the alternation of the night and the day, are what? Ayatullah. So doing science is it is nothing but studying ayatullah. So again, there are so many natural elements in the Quran that are mentioned. Everything from sun and the moon, stars and the heavens to honeybee. And some of which Allah swears by, right? وَالشَّمْسُ وَضُحَاهَا, for example. There are so many natural elements that they are so important, so significant, that Allah swears by them. What does this tell us? Right? We need to really study these things. And Quran also draws our attention to the fact that there is a mathematical order in the universe, right? Of course, mathematics is so important, so fundamental to doing science. Okay, and Allah says there is no change in Sunnatullah. We can relate to the fact that natural laws are universal in time and space. Otherwise, doing science would not be possible, right? There is no change in Sunnatullah. And importance of observation is very important to science. And Allah encourages us to do that. Travel through the earth and observe how He began creation. You see? Observe. Go around and observe. You see? This is very important to do science. Okay, I'm almost done. So, as you see, if you think about it, you'll see that Quranic motivation to do science is not for practical disciplines, but it is really for basic and fundamental sciences like mathematics and physics and astronomy and anthropology, things like that. And it is a means to understand Allah. It is why we are created, right? We need to, and you see, Al-Biruni, one of the greatest of Islamic scholars, said, verse number 191, Surah Ali Imran, was my motivation and inspiration to do science, to do astronomy, right? And Ibn al-Haytham said this, there is no better way to get closer to Allah than acquiring knowledge. You see? In other words, he's saying, doing science brings me closer to Allah rather than the other way around. You see? And one of the modern Muslim scholars, Abdus Salam, says, as a scientist, Quran speaks to me. Right? Again, so as we think about it, Quran encourages us all of these disciplines, everything from astronomy to anthropology to geology to zoology. Okay, there was even meteorology, yes. By the way, I have a great interest in meteorology as well. And Quran talks about formation of the clouds and the rain, right? So you see, look at these disciplines. They're not engineering, right, or business, right? So, of course, there are many hadiths also that encourage learning and scholarship. I don't have time to talk about all of these things, but I pick one that was already talked about in the previous, right? Allah has not created any disease except that He also created a cure for it. What an encouragement to do research in medicine, isn't it? Right? But we need to find it. We need to find it. It is there. We need to find it. Okay. So what do we do from here? So first, I observe that the state of affairs in the Muslim world is not great at the moment, right? A lot of Muslims simply don't know much of this, right? Their own history. Ignorance is the most common situation, unfortunately. Others vaguely know something about this, but they may tend to exaggerate. You see, Muslims is everything, Western world stole it. I mean, this is really superficial. And again, this is superficial. We need to do better than that, right? And of course, it is mixed with false information like Muslims invented zero. It is very popular false information. Superficial, we need to do better than that. And others, there are some ultra-seculars in Muslim world who think that, it was religion that caused us to fall behind. So we need to abandon anything Arabic and Islamic, and we should westernize. You see, there is also that, right? I know it from my own experience. None of this is healthy, right? None of this is healthy, and we need to do better than that. So in my opinion, again, what should we do? We should first need to learn our lessons, our history. To be able to do that, we first need to learn history as accurately as possible, right? And we need to learn from the rise and the fall, right? And we need to be honest, fair, and objective, and avoid exaggerations and superficiality, and we need to go deep, and we need to seek the truth, right? And even if it means going out of our comfort zone, we should be just seeking truth. Sometimes it will require us to go out of our comfort zone. And we should also think about discrepancy between fundamental teachings of the Quran and the practice. There is a huge discrepancy. We need to be honest about it. Why is that, right? Why is that? I mean, it's a big question, right? We need to think about it. And again, to make progress, we need to be open-minded. We need to seek the truth. Okay, wisdom is our lost property, and we need to seek it wherever it might be. So again, this is really, when the Quran says fanzur, it is not just a superficial look. We need to look deeply, right? Because there are ayat. These are ayatullah. It requires deep investigation, right? And we need to invest in basic sciences, brothers and sisters. It is not only engineering and medicine and business, but also fundamental sciences like mathematics and physics and biology and chemistry and anthropology and sociology. All of these disciplines, they should not be ignored, neglected. And unfortunately for the large part, when we think about education or we think about engineering and medicine and business and making money, no, making money should not be our primary goal in doing science. It should be studying ayatullah. That should be our real motivation, right? So we need to have critical thinking, spirit of questioning. So we need the mind of Ibn al-Haytham to be the leaders in scientific research, right? And we need to develop strong work ethics, really. I think this is lacking, generally speaking, in the Muslim world. Strong work ethics and accountability, we are really lacking at. And it is not a coincidence that Muslim world is behind, not only in the scientific research, but everything else. Justice and human rights and freedoms, we are behind in all of these things, right? Why is it that there is so much corruption and injustice in the Muslim world, right? It is not a coincidence that we are behind in science, because we are behind in all of these things, because we do not really practice the fundamental teachings of the Quran, right? So, I mean, that really bothers me, and I think it will bother everyone who really think about these things. So we should have a holistic approach. And my liberal arts philosophy of education really promotes this holistic approach, right? We need to look at things from broader perspectives, from multiple perspectives. So this is my last slide. So we really need to do more academic research on primary source materials, right? And unfortunately, history of science, philosophy of science, among the neglected disciplines in the Muslim world. That should change. That's why we are sitting on all of these valuable manuscripts and we are not studying them. That is not acceptable. But then we also need to work on disseminating this information to the general public. So myself and my colleague who will speak tomorrow, we are starting a project for university students in the US to promote research and awareness of Islamic contributions to mathematics called Al-Khawarizmi Project. And you will hear more about it tomorrow, inshallah. And unless this material is included in school curriculum, it is not going to become common knowledge, you see. It will remain among very few people, right? So we need to change that. And this requires a huge amount of effort. It is a political endeavor to put something in school curriculum. It is difficult. It takes a lot of resources, but we need to try, right? And of course, we need to develop a vision of the future, a realistic future. We need to go beyond nostalgia and being superficial. We need to really deeply analyze history and teachings of the Quran, and we need to take a holistic approach to improve and develop a vision for future. Okay, thank you for your attention, and sorry about going over time. If you have any questions, I'm happy to talk about this in any way. You can see my website, my email, and you can see our videos. Thank you so much.